The poem that we are going to study today is The Unknown Citizen. All of you would agree with me that poetry is not easy to understand. The poet is a gifted man, an inspired person who packs all his emotions and thoughts into small little words. It is for us to understand the meaning of words, their association with other words, and the feelings of the poet in order to understand the message that he wants to convey to us in the poem. Especially in a poem like The Unknown Citizen, many questions arise in our mind. Why has the poet chosen a title that he has? Why does he want to talk about a citizen who is unknown? Why doesn't he use as many metaphors and similes as other poets do? Now, these questions, I think, come up in your mind, but I'm sure you will get the answers as we proceed with the poem. My objective today is to give you an in-depth analysis and understanding of the poem. All of you would have read poetry that would have touched your hearts, where the poet has transported us into another world, a world of imagination which takes us away, far, far away from the real world in which we live. Keats, in the opening line of one of his most famous odes, the Ode to a Nightingale, for example, says, "My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk." Now this line captures our hearts and takes us along with him into the world of the nightingale, to listen to the song of the nightingale, which is so melodious, so happy, and so free. Wordsworth defined poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. He said that amidst nature he could hear the still sad music of humanity. Don't we also hear it along with him? We do, of course. But if we go to The Unknown Citizen with these expectations, we are in for a surprise. W.H. Auden does not transport us into another world. He transfixes us to the here and now. He talks about the mechanical, the monotonous life that we lead. He succeeds in doing what he sets out to do, to tell us how immense is the control of the state over the individual. The poet in this poem talks about the absolute necessity for man to safeguard his freedom and to protect his happiness from the clutches of the state. He tells us how important it is for man to devote a little bit of time for himself, for his freedom and for his little happinesses. What is this life full of care? There is no time to stand and stare. There is no time to stand under the boughs and stare long like the sheep and cows, said W.H. Davies in his poem Leisure. And W.H. Auden in his Unknown Citizen seems to be completely in compliance with W.H. Davies. The poet in this poem tells us how very difficult it is for man to retain his individuality and his identity in a fast changing techno-savvy world of today. Auden comments on human nature and talks about the endeavor of man to try to fit into the world to which he belongs. He tries to conform to the utmost, and in return for that, what does he get? He's reduced to a number and a statistic. The subtitle of the poem is very ironic. The poet sarcastically alluding to the make-believe concept that the government enforced that every individual should be classified by an alphanumeric tag. He is very critical of the relentless pursuit of the state of the individual. He says that the state does not allow any freedom to the individual, any freedom to enjoy the little acts of unremembered pleasure that Wordsworth speaks of in his poem, The Tintern Abbey. The title of the poem, The Unknown Citizen, too, is ironic. The poet says that everybody knows everything about the citizen, but nobody knows his name. Is that possible? Questions the poet. And we also feel this question arising in our mind. A modernist, W.H. Auden, was very concerned about the modern idea of man losing his identity in the fast-paced technological world of today. He is very critical of the state taking control over the individual. In The Unknown Citizen, he tells us that all the organizations of the government and research agencies are very happy with the unknown citizen because he does everything right at the right time. He is a model of compliance. He listens to every dictate of the state. He is a loyal and a friendly man. He generates revenue to the government because he believes in the installment schemes. He has everything that a modern man needs to have: a gramophone, a radio, a car, and a Frigidaire. The poet mocks the citizen who relinquishes his identity in order to serve the state. The state expects these sacrifices from the individual. W.H. Auden, a modernist, was very concerned about the modern idea of man losing his identity in the fast-paced world of today. The three dangers that Auden mentions in this poem, which are really the dangers that man has to face today, are anonymity, conformity, and the state control over the individual. Man has to really fight against these forces in order to retain his happiness and his individuality. The state-run organizations and research agencies that the poet mentions are all very happy with the unknown citizen because he does all the right things at the right time. He is a loyal worker, very sincere and faithful. He generates a lot of revenue to the government because he understands the benefits of the installment schemes. He spends a lot of money in buying things which are taxable, and in this way he helps the government. He's a very sociable and friendly man, and he also has the right number of children. The poet criticizes the individual who relinquishes his happiness and his freedom in order to serve the state. The state expects these sacrifices from the modern day saint, a saint who does not, like in the past, lead a holy life or seek profound truths, but on the other hand, who sacrifices his all for the sake of the state. This is the gist of The Unknown Citizen. Auden, I think it is very clear from this to understand what Auden wanted us to understand. The Unknown Citizen by W.H. Auden. He was found by the Bureau of Statistics to be one against whom there was no official complaint. And all the reports on his conduct agree that, in the modern sense of the old-fashioned word, he was a saint. For in everything he did, he served the greater community. Except for the war, till the day he retired, he worked in a factory and never got fired. But satisfied his employers, Fudge Motors Incorporated. Yet, he wasn't a scab or odd in his views, for his union reports that he paid his dues. Our report on his union shows it was sound. And our social psychology workers found that he was popular with his mates and liked a drink. The press was convinced that he bought a paper every day and that his reactions to advertisements were normal in every way. Policies taken out in his name prove that he was fully insured, and his health card shows he was once in hospital but left it cured. Both producers' research and high-grade living declare he was fully sensible to the advantages of the installment plan and had everything necessary to the modern man: a phonograph, a radio, a car, and a Frigidaire. Our researchers into public opinion are content that he held the proper opinions for the time of year. When there was peace, He was for peace. When there was war, he went. He was married and had added 5 children to the population, which our eugenist says was the right number for a parent of his generation, and our teachers report that he never interfered with their education. Was he free? Was he happy? The question is absurd. Had anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard. Students, we'll go into a detailed analysis of the poem now. At the very beginning of the poem, we get a sense of the immense control of the state over the individual. The poet talks about how indifferent and impersonal the attitude of the government towards the individual is. The poem is written from the point of view of a fictional bureaucrat who sits at his desk shuffling papers all day, little knowing or caring that the decisions that he makes affect the lives of individuals that he hasn't even seen in his lifetime. The state assumes a big brother-like attitude, much like Orwell's 1984 or Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World, in that the state pretends to be all-knowing, except for the things that really matter. The very first line of the poem introduces us to the Bureau of Statistics and its findings. What has the Bureau of Statistics found about the unknown citizen? That his conduct was excellent and that there was no written complaint ever about him. In the modern sense of an old-fashioned word, he was a saint, said the poet. We should understand from this line that the modern meaning of the word saint meant one who sacrificed his everything to listen to the dictates of the state. The poet then goes on to tell us about the work history of the unknown citizen. He worked for a company which was called Fudge Motors Incorporated. Until the day of retirement, he worked loyally for this company, except during the time of war, when he went to war. The poet then talks about the union, the trade union to which the unknown citizen belonged. The union acknowledged his loyalty and ascertained his normalcy. The union reported that he wasn't a scab or odd in his views. He also paid his dues. The next line of the poem, that our reports on the union said that the opinion of the union was sound, tells us of the immense control of the state over the individual. It doesn't leave him any privacy, any freedom to be on his own. That the citizen was an amiable and sociable man is reported by the social psychology workers. The social psychology workers, researchers, report that he loved to share a drink with his mates. It should be noted that it was the pastime of the era that when workers worked for long hours in the factory, while returning home, stopped at a pub and had a drink, ascertains the normalcy of the unknown citizen. The word popular further enhances the citizen's compliance with the given and the accepted. A conscientious man, he bought a newspaper every day, and his reaction to advertisements were normal in every way. The policies taken out in his name proved that he was fully insured. His health card said that he was only once in hospital, but he left it cured. The producer's research and high-grade living reported that he was fully sensible to the installment plan. He had everything that a modern man needed to have to lead a comfortable life: a gramophone, a car, a Frigidaire, and a radio. The next few lines talk about the family of the unknown citizen. He was married and he had 5 children. The right number of children, according to the population expert, that a parent of his generation needed to have. The poet says that all the government agencies and research organizations were happy with the individual. The Bureau of Statistics, the producers Research and High Grade Living, the medical department, the press, and so on and so forth. The last couplet, which speaks about the individual's own happiness and freedom, is very hard-hitting. The poet asks us, despite fulfilling all the expectations of the state, is the individual happy? Is he free? And the last line of the poem, which says that had anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard, tells us of the suffocating control that the state puts the individual under. The clinical tone which the poet adopts is very apt to describe the flawed methods of the government, which base their judgment of an individual on reports and documents of his conformity and his normalcy. The poem was written in the early years of the 20th century. Today, we are into the early years of the 21st century. Though so many years have elapsed since the writing of the poem still rings true today. The poet tells us that man, in his earnestness to fulfill the expectations of a good citizen, becomes an unknown citizen. All of you students would have realized by now that the poem is very ironical in its tone. What is irony? Irony is a mode of speech where the real meaning is exactly the opposite of what is literally conveyed. I give you an example of irony. My class today, all of you know, is from 10 to 11 o'clock. All of you are seated when I come into the class. But there is one student who enters the class at 10 minutes to 11. I look at the student and I say this, oh, good morning. I'm so happy that you're in time for the next class. I'm not happy with the individual for coming late, but in fact I'm angry and I'm ironical in my tone. The best example, of course, from literature that I can quote is from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. I would like to read a few sentences of the speech of Antony from Julius Caesar. Here, under the leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. What better example of irony can we get than this? All of us will agree after the reading of the poem that the poem is extremely ironic. From the title to the subtitle to the content of the entire poem, the poet means one thing and says another. I hope all of you have enjoyed the poem along with me. I'm sure it would take you back to the reading of the poem again and again, and maybe you would draw more out of the poem than we have been able to in this class. Thank you very much.